Hello, I'm honored to be sharing tonight on equipping an apostolic body. I want to make a disclaimer right away. Please note that I'm not saying there is one right way or even several right ways to equip a church. There are certainly several different ways and several different ideas. I'm sure you'll hear me tonight and say, well, what about X and what about Y? And I'm sure you're right, but this is just a culmination of some ideas and experiences I've had I'd like to share tonight. So I'd like to start by saying when we think about equipping our churches, I want to recall something I learned over the holidays actually from Hockey Canada. And they had a tagline, a commercial for women's hockey that said, "What gets celebrated grows." And the whole message of the marketing campaign was, if you celebrate women's hockey, if you watch it, if you encourage it, if you give your money to it, it will grow. And they were right. And it's in the same way in church life sometimes. Whatever we celebrate grows. And that could be true on the negative side and the positive side. So I think it's important as we just head into this discussion, we look at the different characteristics that make up a church that is apostolic. I think a good place to start is by looking at the Church of Antioch. It's a church that we can know is a good example of a church that is somewhat like churches today. Back then, Antioch was found to be a church that was in a growing urban context. It was multiracial. It was surrounded by multiple religions. It had a big gap in the city between rich and poor. There was economic prosperity. There was economic depression. So in many ways, much like a major city from today. I find it also particularly interesting that Antioch is where Christians got their name. What is most interesting for me, it seems from our study, that it was the outsiders, the people outside the church, that gave them the name. You see, they were living so true and so apostolically, people outside came up with a new name for these people. These people are saying, oh, these are the Christ followers. These are the people who follow Jesus. And we as a culture are separating them now from the other people that are like them and saying they are different, they are distinct because they're all about Jesus. What a great commentary on the way that church lived. And, I can almost just stop there and say living apostolically and equipping a church apostolically is all about Jesus, but I've got a little more to share about that. So what else do we know about the Church of Antioch that could help us learn today and maybe apply in our own local churches? First thing we know from Antioch is that they had a spirit-filled leadership and church body. In Antioch, we see Barnabas described as a spirit-filled leader and full of faith. We also see the spirit-filled prophet Agabus, who actually prophesies about a coming famine in Judea, and it comes to pass. We also see the Spirit move and set apart Paul and Barnabas for the missionary work as the church was gathered for worship. One thing I find very interesting as well about the Church of Antioch is that it acted on its spirit-filled leadership and direction. For example, after that prophecy about the famine to come, they immediately got together, and another hallmark of the evidence of apostolic living in that church, they began to gather money to give to their brothers and sisters in another region. So right away, they got big into missions. And I think that's a really encouraging word. So the Antioch church was committed also to disciples and to disciple making. Every believer in every church, of course, is called to make disciples. And the people of Antioch were mostly new converts from outside the Jewish faith, and they needed to be fully absorbed and trained in their understanding of the gospel. And we notice this church begins to transform and has a gigantic hunger for discipleship when we read that Paul and Barnabas were there for over a year to train them and to build them up. There was, as I said, this hunger to be discipled, and then the leadership of the church in general sent their best and brightest to supply the food, as it were, the discipleship for that need. The Antioch church also had core doctrinal convictions. They were not loose in their theology. We know that they followed and received apostolic direction. It's a sign that the church had been discipled and functioning apostolically. We read that when there was a conflict, as it were, with the church in general over the idea of circumcision, they awaited the decision of the apostles, and when they read the letter of the decision out loud, the Bible tells us they were glad for its encouraging message, and then they implemented what they were told. We also see that the church in Antioch had an emerging fivefold ministry. They had prophets and teachers. We know that for sure, and we know that there's reference to apostles and pastors and so on visiting. Barnabas and Saul, of course, became apostles while they were there. They were called out from there. And here we see another evidence of moving apostolically. They were a sending church. The Bible clearly tells us after they prayed for them, they sent them off. So the leadership and congregation of the Antioch church was also multi-ethnic. The Jerusalem church was, of course, multilingual and had some multi-ethnicity as well, but given that it was Jerusalem, the center of Judaism, and so on, it was quite monocultural. But Antioch was transcultural. There was people from all over the place there, and this may not apply in your circumstances all the time, but certainly if you're in North America and in a city or even a town, this is either already your reality or will become your reality sometime soon. And I'm sure not a lot of this is groundbreaking for you, but I think it's good to learn overall some tips and tricks, as it were, from the church at Antioch. Finally, we also see an overarching story from the church in Antioch that the church takes on the character of its leadership. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with John Maxwell and his maxim of leadership is the lid. Often that's used to say that a church can go no farther than its leadership. And there's some truth to that. Although John Maxwell's actual point of his book was that the leadership ability of the individual determines that person's level of effectiveness. I don't really want to focus there. What I'm trying to get at today is something more like something Davies Lewis shared. He's a preacher down from the U.S., and he said, "We teach what we know, but we reproduce what we are." So I want to be very clear here before I go on that I think knowledge is very important, and it's an important facet of our own personal development and the development of equipping our churches apostolically. So I want us to get deep into theology. Let's welcome discussions of orthodoxy and orthopraxis and so on. But we know that someone can know seemingly everything and still not be living it themselves. And if we're not living it ourselves, we can't reproduce it in others. So I'll continue sharing some characteristics I think that need to be seen in leaders that are looking to equip their church apostolically so that then their people will also live and move apostolically. One, and this may seem obvious, but you have to have a deep love for the church. D.P. Williams, the founder of the AC Church in the UK, said, "There is nothing higher, nearer the heart of God than his church." It's his church. We need to remember that. And he loves it more than we ever could. It's his body. He gave it himself for it. And he gave us the essential ministry gifts that we would be able to help it to live and to grow. I suggest also that apostolic churches and equipping them apostolically means that we need to be thoroughly supernatural while at the same time being thoroughly practical. It's not an either-or proposition, but it's a both-and proposition. It's knowledge and experience, it's supernatural, it's practical. Just a few ideas I put together. I would add that we equip our church bodies apostolic when we prioritize impartation over inspiration. This is one of those good versus the best scenarios. Inspiration is good. It's nice. It's nice to inspire. It's nice to be inspired. And it certainly has its place in ministry. But it can come and go. It can go up and down. But this is never the case with impartation. Inspiration can never equal true impartation. Impartation, as we know, is the act of giving or granting something. In the Bible, we see so many examples of it. Spiritual gifts are imparted. Wisdom is imparted. The message of the gospel is imparted. Even material goods are imparted. Let's hear Paul's heart for impartation and for the equipping of his people in the church of Rome. Romans 1:11 tells us, "I long to see you so that I may impart some spiritual gift to make you strong." Now, Paul knew he was writing a letter. Maybe he was hoping to impart through the letter. He certainly knew he could inspire them through the letter, but he wanted to see them so that he could impart something, to give them something face to face. The love of the body and the desire to give others gifts is evident. Apostolic leaders and churches, I believe, also focus on releasing, not retention. This can be a challenge because I'm sure many of you on this call have experienced what I'm about to say. You disciple somebody, train them up, befriend them, and see them grow before your eyes, bless the church, they bless you, they bless others, and then the time comes when the Lord calls them away, often to other cities and other towns. But releasing is much, much more than even just that. I'm also not saying we shouldn't have retention strategies in our church. I believe we should always effectively be working towards helping our members find the release while teaching them about staying with the body. But it's what we're here for, right? We talk about Ephesians 4 all the time. The Bible tells us he gave the ascension gifts to equip his people for the works of service so the body of Christ may be built up. It's all for the body. So we want and we look forward to that release. Another thing to remember is we only have so much time. We have to choose to focus. And this is the next characteristic I'd like to consider with you. We read in 2 Timothy where Paul is instructing Timothy with this leadership advice. He's saying, join with me in suffering like a good soldier of Jesus Christ. No one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civilian affairs, but rather tries to please his commanding officer, and so on. And before commenting on this, I decided to do something and reach out to my brother, who is an actual soldier. And as a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and some others, I asked him, I said, when you read this, what does it say to you as a believer and as a real soldier? And here's what he had to say. He goes, it reminds me of the first principle of war, which is the selection and maintenance of the aim. That means you allow nothing to distract you from that goal. And all that is at your disposal should work towards that one aim. He says, I think Paul uses a military analogy and war because it's a matter of life and death. There are no second chances. The aim of war is called for full commitment. Your goal is victory. Your commanding officer has a plan, and you're trying to please your commanding officer in achieving it. Having been a soldier, there's no greater feeling than knowing you helped achieve an objective greater than yourself. Of course, for Rome, it was the glory of Rome. But for us, it is the glory of God. Another way of looking at it, I would suggest, is to borrow a phrase from Jesus' youth, where he said, I must be about my Father's business. This has actually become quite a theme in our local church recently, and I think it's something that speaks to the whole idea of the selection and maintenance of the one aim. I would like to also add one more word about apostolic leaders being encouraging. Perhaps it's a point driven home more during this pandemic, but I believe it's an important key to be equipping our churches apostolically in this time. People are constantly being bombarded by marketing and social media, and yes, even church leaders, to fear and to hate and to be angry. And an encouraging word can cut through all this. And Thessalonians tells us, therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. So I would like to do something here tonight and commend Pastor Julie from VCC. As many of you know, Julie has been posting daily for some time now, encouraging messages on her Facebook page. I haven't talked to her about this, but I do get to see it every day. And you know what? It works. I now find myself daily looking to see what she's posting. Sure, it may seem like a small thing, but this tiny pinprick of light in the cesspool of the insanity that is Facebook is already making a difference and is a great example of what I'm trying to convey. So first, Julie, keep on going. We just really appreciate it. And for the rest of us, we can go search out new and interesting ways, or maybe there's old, tried and true ways to be encouraging. So I encourage all of us to think about how we can be more encouraging. And I would say this to all leaders and all church members. Let us remember that there is no retirement in the kingdom of God, and there's certainly no retirement in a church that's moving apostolically. No one moves aside, we move up. We don't step down, we step up. There's many of you on this call who are in ministry can look forward to the day where you don't have to worry about the 3 B's anymore. The budget, the building, and the bylaws. And after that, you can dedicate more time to building up and encouraging the people who take the roles we once occupied. I had this idea while watching a great documentary on Disney Plus about the director Jon Favreau. You could see that almost all of his day now was spent equipping, enabling, and encouraging others and all the experts around him to one common goal. For them, of course, is making fantastic movies. But you could see that his success cemented, he began to engage other directors, other experts, other people. And he took this idea that he made, that he came up with, and he gave it to others. And he helped them nurture it, and he helped them grow. And he didn't leave and walk away, but he stays present and is with them, helping them to grow and to make it better. So an apostolic leader is more like a director than we are a controller. There is no replacement. There is just release and reward in the kingdom. And this is also true in our local bodies. Every member is a vital part of the body of Christ. From the youngest to the oldest, each uniquely gifted and positioned to minister to each other and to our communities. It's when we endeavor to equip them with this truth, I believe we are closer to understanding what Paul says in Ephesians, that God's intent was that now through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. So I hope in some way you've been encouraged by what I've shared today. I believe we are in the midst of a great move of God. None of that it's far off or it's coming. I believe we're right in the middle of it. And I'm glad to be part of what God is doing in your town, in your city, wherever you are in your country, and glad to have shared with you this evening. So I'll just leave you with this thought. 2 Corinthians 13:11 reminds us, finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice, strive for full restoration, encourage one another, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace be with you.